The Fairy Folk. Some might wonder who or what are the fairy folk. There are stories upon stories of them and their doings in many places, but most of all in Ireland, where it was said they lived longest, and if they still walk the earth, where they can yet be found. The country folk claim they are fallen angels, lacking the merit to stay in heaven, while being kindly enough to avoid hell. The Book of Armagh calls them earth gods, while scholars of Irish legend and lore call them the gods of ancient Ireland. The Tuatha De Danann, who lacking worship had shrunk so they'd hardly even reach a man's knee. These wise scholars will present to you as evidence the way that the fairies in stories are the names of De Danann, princes of old, and that they used to be called the Slua Siada, or the fairy host. Yet against these opinions there's much to recommend the view that they're fallen angels, given as they are to caprice without conscience. Treating the kind-hearted well and giving to the wicked in kind, the fairies are so whimsical that you should only refer to them as the gentle people for fear of their ire, if you must refer to them at all, and perhaps it is the lack of malice in their evil that was their saving, although they do look after people who leave a little milk out in a dish for them of an evening. Those that incur their wrath may find themselves paralysed by a fairy dart. Are they then perhaps the old gods of Ireland, old gods of the earth? Mystics and occultists and poets and dreamers will tell you that the world we see is but the surface of the whole, barely even ripples atop a deep pool, and perhaps the fairies are better swimmers than us. We see more of this world when we dream, but it's always there, even when you cross the street and buy a loaf of bread. But of course the only thing we can say with certainty about the fairies is that they're inconsistent. You never know what's going to happen next with them. They can adopt any size or form that takes their fancy, and spend most of their time fighting and feasting and sharing embraces. Except only one, the cobbler, who some call the leprechaun. They have 3 great feast days. The first is the day before May, when they go to the White Plain and fight for the best ears of corn, struggling amongst one another. Any old man in the countryside seeing a whirling wind whipping at the trees, causing a stir, will doff his cap and bow low, for he knows the fairies are close. Their second feast is that of Midsummer's Eve. That is their time for dancing and merriment. But don't get befuddled by their capering, for that's also the day they steal away pretty mortals to be their mates for all eternity. And the third then comes on November Eve. That is when they are darkest, at the dying of the year, although it is said they themselves don't die. On that night they dance with the dead, and the dreaded Púca walks abroad, and witches make their spells. They love nothing more than to sing, and it's rumoured that many of the great old songs of Ireland were overheard at their feasts. But where should you sing them near to a fairy wrath, for they're none too fond of their wonderful songs being fumbled by clumsy mortals, and yet when they sing they can charm and enchant maidens away with them. A perilous thing is a fairy's fun. A traveller must also beware, as there are a great many raths or fairy forts of old scattered throughout Ireland today, numbering in the tens of thousands, and it is here, the wise say, that the good people or fairy folk gather to hold their revels. Nobody would dare to cross, let alone build on a fairy dwelling in the past, marking as they did the boundary between our civilized world and the wild other world. To trespass on their land was to risk a beating or worse, for the fairies were known to hold great grudges against families. As a scholar in the 1910s wrote about speaking to a local farmer, I now asked John what sort of a race the good people are, and where they came from, and this is his reply. People killed and murdered in war stay on earth till their time is up, and they are among the good people. The souls on this earth are as thick as the grass, a thick clump, and you can't see them, and evil spirits are just as thick too, and people don't know it. The old folk saw the good people here on the hill 100 times, and they'd always be talking about them. The good people can see everything, and you dare not meddle with them. They live in raths, and their houses are in them. In the 1950s, the government of Ireland tried to build a road through a fairy fort, but the workers threw down their tools and refused, despite all benefits and bonuses offered, to continue their work. When the politician suggested building a fence around the rath, the man responsible for the road decided it would be a bad idea. As he wryly said, next the fairies would come looking for pensions.